for some of you, this is going to be incredibly offensive, but in terms of transformation and vulnerability and just being real and truthful and not putting up a pretense, I think it's helpful, is that I would call myself racist, I would call myself prejudiced, despite the work I do. If you had to look into my life in the work I do, you might find that kind of like surprising. And the reality is I don't really portray racism. On my best day, I do a fairly good job of controlling myself. But the reality is within my brain, there are these prejudicial racist thoughts that like my arms just cannot get down to. No matter what I do, I can't, exercise them from my soul. I can't get them out. They're in there. They're in my mind. They're so stubborn, like almost impossible to kill, And maybe you can relate, or the reality is probably you can't relate. Your set of experiences is so different from mine. But and thankfully, and I think that's why it's important that you lead us as a generation. For those of you who were born after 1994, your set of experiences is so valuable to our society. And what scares me so much is how few 18-year-olds voted. I think it was 90% didn't, and that terrifies me because we're left in a society and that's desperate for transformation, and our transformation agents are sitting on the sidelines because they're disillusioned. And so I want to invite you into the field just by showing you, how desperately we need it. Why is it so hard for me to get into the prejudice and racism in my soul? Why might it be so hard for you or your parents or those around you, your teachers, two very simple ideas that I'm going to move through quite quickly so that we're all on the same page here, If we're going to understand why racism is so hard to kill, we've got to understand our minds, how our minds work, and we've got to understand how our minds are affected by experience, So Dr. Caroline Leaf, she writes this incredible book called Switching on Your Brain, and she calls it the key to happiness, thinking, and health. And really what she does is explain how the mind works. And in essence, she tells us that no one really knows how the mind works, which is a mind bender. We still don't know. It's not a computer. It works completely different. It's organic as opposed to binary. But what we do know is that these billions of neurons store information based on repetition. So somehow that electrical impulse traveling up and down the neuron enough times creates memories or ideas, and you repeat that idea enough time, and it becomes stubborn, okay, which is where my prejudice and racism is. It's stored stubbornly within the depth of my brain, and it's extremely hard to kill, although I have made some great progress. Which kind of neatly segues us into the second idea, which is experience, A lot of people are really scared of this idea of systemic racism, the schools capture movement, or the conservative Republican Party in America, for example, is deeply terrified of critical race theory for some good reasons, but deeply terrified about the idea of systemic racism. I think when it comes to South Africa, systemic racism is easy to see. I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't all agree that there's systemic racism. We look at our history. We're taught it from a Western perspective. If you're Christian, you'll know that even the Christianity we have is deeply Western, and its influence on Africa is again deeply Western and influenced by whiteness. The spatial realities in South Africa are again an easy way to see how apartheid and colonialism have literally separated people by race. Our privileged communities are the most representative of race, which is amazing, and that's thanks to BEE. But our former homelands, the Eastern Cape and townships in every major city, you'll know that those are some of the areas that are worst affected by inequality, and that is dominated by race. It's majority of black, Indian, colored people, Asian people live in townships. Very few white people live in townships. Almost none. Okay, and so we have systemic racism in our society. We have brains that store information based on repetition. How does that combine? Well, prejudice and racism is reinforced almost daily in some of our environments, and that's why it's so hard to kill, and that's why it's so critical that we deal with it aggressively, like I hope I'm kind of demonstrating now. And so if we're going to deal with our racism, prejudice, to create some connection in our lifetime with those kind of constructs, apartheid and colonialism, designed to inhibit, we're going to have to come up with some really smart ways of doing that, and I hope you'll love the solution that we're going to talk about in the next session.